I'm Ian, 30 years old, and my world collapsed when my parents died and left me a broken cabin in Alaska while my brother Jackson got a $1.2 million mansion in Miami. The pain doubled when my fiancée Melissa called me a pathetic loser and left me for him. Drowning in despair, I retreated to that cabin, never imagining I'd find something there worth $500 million. Before I continue this wild journey, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear more incredible life-changing stories like mine. Growing up in Seattle, I always knew I was the second favorite. My parents, Robert and Diana, never tried to hide their preference for Jackson, my older brother, by 3 years. While they attended every single one of his football games, debate competitions, and school events, mine were often met with excuses about work commitments or scheduling conflicts. I still remember my 8th grade science fair, where I won first place for my renewable energy project. My parents sent their assistant with a gift card instead of coming themselves because Jackson had a regular season game the same evening. This pattern continued throughout our childhood and teenage years. Jackson received a brand new car for his 16th birthday, while I got a used sedan with 100,000 miles when my turn came. For college, they fully funded his education at an Ivy League school, while I worked part-time jobs to supplement my partial scholarship at the state university. Despite this obvious favoritism, I never allowed resentment to consume me. I channeled my energy into building myself up through hard work and perseverance. After graduating with a degree in mechanical engineering, I secured a decent job at a manufacturing firm in Seattle. The pay wasn't extraordinary, but it was enough to rent a small apartment and slowly build my savings. It was at a company holiday party 4 years ago that I met Melissa. She worked in the marketing department, and her vibrant personality immediately drew me in. With curly auburn hair, bright green eyes, and a laugh that could light up the darkest room, she was everything I never knew I needed. Our connection was instant, and within 6 months we were inseparable. Melissa understood my complicated family dynamics and became my rock. When family gatherings became uncomfortable due to my parents' obvious preference for Jackson and his achievements, she would squeeze my hand under the table and later remind me of my own worth. We built our relationship on mutual respect and shared dreams of eventually owning a home, starting a family, and perhaps even launching our own business someday. 2 years into our relationship, I proposed during a weekend hiking trip to Mount Rainier. The joy in her eyes when she said yes remains one of my most treasured memories. We began planning our wedding, opting for a modest ceremony that we could afford without going into debt. Melissa seemed content with our plans, though occasionally she would point out venues or decorations beyond our budget after spending time with her wealthier friends. Last winter, everything changed. My parents were returning from a European vacation when their private plane encountered severe turbulence and crashed over the Atlantic. There were no survivors. The news hit me like a physical blow. Despite their flaws and favoritism, they were still my parents, and I loved them deeply. In the midst of grief, Jackson and I had to come together to handle funeral arrangements in their estate. The reading of the will took place in our family lawyer's office on a rainy Tuesday morning. Jackson arrived in an expensive suit, his face appropriately solemn, but his posture confident. Melissa sat beside me, her hand resting supportively on my knee. The lawyer, Thomas Wilson, who had worked with my family for decades, adjusted his glasses and began reading the document. What followed felt like a cruel joke. After distributing various smaller assets and heirlooms, he arrived at the primary real estate holdings. Jackson was awarded their main residence in Seattle, valued at approximately $2 million, and their vacation mansion in Miami Beach, worth $1.2 million. When my name was mentioned, I leaned forward expectantly, assuming I would receive something of comparable value. Instead, I was left their old hunting cabin in a remote part of Alaska, a property my father had mentioned perhaps twice throughout my entire life. The lawyer described it as needing significant repairs with an estimated value of less than $50,000. The room fell silent. I felt as if all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. How could they have been so blatantly unfair, even in death? Jackson cleared his throat, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips, before he smoothed his features back into an appropriately mournful expression. Melissa's hand had frozen on my knee. When I glanced at her, I caught a flash of disappointment crossing her face before she quickly masked it with a sympathetic smile. The contrast between her reaction and her usual supportive nature sent a chill through me that I tried desperately to ignore. Outside the lawyer's office, Jackson approached me with a practiced look of concern. "Tough break about the cabin, little brother. If you need any help with it, just let me know." His words sounded considerate, but the gleam in his eyes told a different story. He was enjoying this final proof of our parents' preference. Melissa was uncharacteristically quiet during our drive home. When I finally broke the silence to express my hurt and confusion over my parents' decision, her response lacked her usual warmth. "Maybe they had their reasons, Ian. At least you got something. We can make it work." Her words were right, but her tone suggested she was trying to convince herself more than me. That night, as Melissa slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, wondering what I had done to deserve such unequal treatment from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and whether this inheritance would be the thing that finally broke the camel's back in my relationship. The weeks following the will reading brought a noticeable shift in my relationship with Melissa. What began as subtle signs of discontent quickly evolved into unmistakable distance between us. Our evening conversations, once flowing easily until midnight, became brief exchanges about household logistics. The warmth in her eyes when she looked at me had cooled considerably. Initially, I attributed her behavior to giving me space to grieve. But as days turned into weeks, it became clear something fundamental had changed. Melissa began critiquing aspects of my life she had previously accepted or even admired. My modest apartment, which she once called cozy and perfect for us, became cramped and depressing. My reliable but aging car was suddenly an embarrassment when we met with friends. "Have you thought about asking for a raise?" she asked one evening as I prepared dinner. "We can't keep living like this forever, especially if we want children someday." "I'm due for a performance review next month," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But you know the company has been tightening budgets lately." She sighed heavily. "Maybe you should look elsewhere then. Jackson mentioned his friend's tech company is hiring. The salaries are much better." The mention of my brother's name stung. Since the will reading, Jackson had been texting Melissa occasionally, supposedly to check on how we were doing. I hadn't thought much of it initially, but the frequency of these messages had increased, and Melissa had become noticeably protective of her phone. Our arguments grew more frequent. What had once been discussions about our future became accusations and defensive responses. After one particularly heated exchange about finances, Melissa stormed out to get some air and didn't return until after midnight. When I asked where she'd been, her answer was vague, "Just driving around thinking." The faint scent of expensive cologne that wasn't mine hung in the air when she passed. I tried desperately to salvage our relationship. I applied for better-paying positions, suggested weekend getaways within our budget, and even considered selling the Alaskan cabin sight unseen just to have some additional funds. But nothing seemed to bridge the growing gulf between us. One Thursday evening, I returned home early from work, hoping to surprise Melissa with takeout from her favorite restaurant. Her car wasn't in its usual spot, but I figured she might be running errands. As I entered our apartment, I noticed her laptop open on the coffee table. A Facebook message notification appeared on the screen from Jackson. Normally, I would never invade her privacy, but something in me snapped. The message read, "Can't wait to see you again tonight. Ian still has no idea, right?" My hands trembled as I set down the food. A quick scroll through their conversation history revealed weeks of messages, each more intimate than the last. They had been meeting regularly while I was at work initially, for friendly lunches that had clearly evolved into something much more. I sat in our darkened apartment for 3 hours, the food growing cold, waiting for Melissa to return. When she finally walked through the door, her cheeks flushed and hair slightly disheveled, the lie was already forming on her lips. Traffic was terrible. I had to work late on the Lodi and Ida. "Don't I?" interrupted, my voice eerily calm despite the storm raging inside me. I saw the messages with Jackson. Her expression shifted from surprise to defiance remarkably quickly. There was no denial, no attempt to explain away the evidence. Instead, she dropped her purse on the counter and faced me directly. "What did you expect, Ian? Look at our life, compared to what Jackson can offer." Her words cut deeper than any knife could have. A tiny apartment vacations we can never afford, and now your inheritance is a broken-down cabin in the middle of nowhere while he got millions. I didn't sign up for this kind of future. Our relationship was never about money, I argued, my voice breaking. We talked about building something together, about love being more important than material things. Melissa laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's what people with no money say to feel better about themselves. Wake up, Ian. You're 30 years old with a mediocre job and no prospects. Your own parents knew you were the lesser son. They proved it in their will. Her words knocked the wind out of me. So everything between us was conditional, 4 years together. Our engagement, all of it hinged on my bank account. I wanted to believe love would be enough, she said, twisting the engagement ring off her finger. But Jackson showed me what life could be like with someone who's actually going somewhere. He's successful, ambitious, connected. What are you offering me except struggles? And that pathetic cabin? I loved you, I whispered. I thought that mattered. Love doesn't pay bills or build a future, she replied coldly, placing the ring on the counter between us. Jackson and I connect on a level you and I never did. He understands my needs, my ambitions. How long, I asked, needing to know the extent of their betrayal. Does it matter? It started as friendship, after the will reading. He was comforting me. Comforting you? I interrupted incredulously. You weren't the one who lost parents, and was then slapped in the face by their final message that you weren't good enough. See, this is exactly why I'm leaving. You're wallowing in self-pity instead of doing something to change your circumstances. Jackson takes action. You just accept whatever life hands you. She grabbed an overnight bag I hadn't noticed she'd packed that morning. I've already moved most of my things to his place. I'll get the rest later. As she reached for the door, something in me broke. So that's it. 4 years thrown away because my brother has more money. She turned, her expression almost pitying. It's not just the money, Ian. It's what the money represents. Drive, ambition, success, things you clearly lack. Her final words cut the deepest. Let's be honest. You're a pathetic loser who will never amount to anything. I was foolish to waste so much time thinking you might change. The door closed behind her with a quiet click that somehow seemed more final than a slam would have been. I stood frozen in our apartment. My apartment now surrounded by the remnants of what I'd thought was a loving relationship built on mutual respect and shared dreams. Everything had been a lie, and now my brother had taken the last thing I truly cared about. The weeks following Melissa's departure were the darkest of my life. I moved through each day like a ghost, going through the motions without truly being present. My performance at work suffered significantly as I struggled to focus on even the simplest tasks. Twice my supervisor called me into his office to discuss my declining productivity. I understand you're going through personal issues, Ian, he said. During our second meeting, his expression, a mixture of concern and frustration. But we have deadlines that can't be ignored. If things don't improve by the end of the month, we'll need to reevaluate your position here. I nodded numbly, promising to do better, while knowing I lacked the emotional capacity to follow through. Each night, I returned to an apartment that felt cavernous despite its small size. Everywhere I looked, I saw Melissa's absence. The empty side of the closet, the bathroom counter missing her cosmetics, the bookshelf with gaps where her novels had been. Sleep became elusive. When exhaustion finally pulled me under, I would dream of her and Jackson together, laughing at my naivety. I'd wake in cold sweats, reaching across the bed for someone who was no longer there. My friends tried to help. Mark invited me for beers, attempting to distract me with stories from his job and gentle encouragement to get back out there. Angela, a college friend who had always been like a sister to me, brought homemade meals and offered a sympathetic ear. But I pushed them away, unable to articulate the depth of my betrayal and unwilling to be a burden. You need to talk to someone professional, Angela suggested after I canceled plans with her for the third time. This isn't healthy, Ian. You're withdrawing from everyone who cares about you. I'm fine, I insisted, the lie transparent even to my own ears. I just need some time. Social media became both my torment and obsession. Despite knowing better, I found myself scrolling through Jackson's profiles late at night, punishing myself with images of him and Melissa, enjoying his Miami mansion, attending exclusive parties and cruising on his newly purchased yacht. Their happiness seemed to mock my misery. Melissa had already changed her relationship status and was flaunting a diamond bracelet Jackson had given her just because, according to her caption. The comments under their photos were the final twist of the knife friends and family, congratulating them on finding each other as if their relationship hadn't been built on the foundation of betraying me. Even more painful were the occasional pitying messages asking about me, to which Jackson would respond with performative concern. "Ian's taking some time for himself right now. We're giving him space to heal." 6 weeks after Melissa left, I reached my breaking point. After a particularly grueling day at work where I'd made a calculation error that could have cost the company thousands if not caught by a colleague, I returned home to find a formal invitation in my mailbox. Jackson and Melissa were hosting an engagement party. They hadn't even waited 3 months after she left me before deciding to marry. That night, I sat on my kitchen floor, surrounded by empty beer bottles, scrolling through real estate listings I couldn't afford and job postings that seemed pointless. In a moment of drunken curiosity, I typed Alaska cabin into my search bar, wondering about the property that had been my pathetic inheritance. The search returned images of rustic hunting lodges, nestled among snow-capped mountains and dense forests. Something about the stark wilderness called to me, perhaps the promise of isolation, or the opportunity to disappear from a life that had become unbearable. I found myself digging through boxes until I located the folder of inheritance paperwork. Inside was a deed to the property, along with several faded photographs of a small wooden structure beside a pristine lake. The cabin looked weathered but sturdy, built from thick logs with a stone chimney. According to the documentation, it sat on 20 acres of land approximately 30 miles from the small town of Talkeetna. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of genuine curiosity. Why had my parents left me this specific property? They had never mentioned any connection to Alaska during their lives. The cabin didn't appear to be particularly valuable, but something about it must have held significance for them to include it in their will. The next morning, fighting through a hangover, I researched flights to Alaska. The impulsiveness of the idea should have given me pause, but instead, it provided the first sense of purpose I'd felt since Melissa's departure. I had 3 weeks of unused vacation time. My supervisor would probably be relieved to have me out of the office given my recent performance. When I mentioned my plan to Mark during a rare phone conversation, his concern was immediate. Alaska, in the middle of winter, to visit a cabin you've never seen that might not even have electricity. This sounds like the beginning of a horror movie, man. I need to get away, I insisted. Clear my head somewhere. Jackson and Melissa won't be flaunting their relationship in my face. At least wait until spring, he countered. Winter in Alaska is no joke, especially for someone with no wilderness experience. But his warnings only strengthened my resolve. The harshness of the environment matched my internal landscape. Perhaps facing physical challenges would distract from the emotional ones. 3 days later, I was on a flight to Anchorage, with a duffel bag containing warm clothing, basic tools, and emergency supplies purchased during a frantic shopping spree. From Anchorage, I rented a 4-wheel drive truck, equipped with snow chains, and loaded it with additional provisions: food, water, a first aid kit, and a satellite phone the rental company insisted upon for remote travel. The drive to Talkeetna took nearly 3 hours along icy roads, bordered by towering pines laden with snow. As I ventured farther from civilization, a strange calm began to replace the chaos in my mind. The pristine white landscape stretched endlessly untouched by the complications of human relationships and betrayals. In Talkeetna, a quirky town that served as a base for mountain climbers attempting to summit Denali, I stopped to purchase additional supplies and ask for directions to the remote area where the cabin was located. The locals regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and concern when I explained my situation. "That old Jenkins place?" asked the elderly cashier at the general store, his bushy eyebrows rising in surprise. "Hasn't been anyone out there in years, far as I know. Road gets pretty treacherous this time of year. You might want to wait till the spring thaw." "I need to see it now," I replied, adding more firewood and canned goods to my already substantial stockpile. He shrugged, seemingly accustomed to the determination of outsiders. "Your funeral, but take this." He handed me a hand-drawn map with additional notes about landmarks and potential hazards. "Cell service is non-existent out there. If you get stuck, stay with your vehicle." The final stretch of my journey proved as challenging as the locals had warned. What began as a narrow paved road gradually deteriorated into a rutted track barely visible beneath the snow. The truck's engine strained as I navigated around fallen branches and through drifts that reached the hood in some places. Just as I began to fear, I'd made a terrible mistake. The trees thinned, revealing a clearing beside a frozen lake. And there, partially obscured by snow, stood the cabin from the photographs, my inheritance, my refuge, and possibly my salvation. The cabin looked even more dilapidated in person than it had in the faded photographs. Snow had accumulated on one section of the roof, causing a visible sag in the structure. Several window panes were cracked or missing, entirely covered with weathered plywood. The wooden steps leading to the front porch groaned ominously beneath my weight as I approached the door. A rusted padlock secured the entrance, but the key from the inheritance paperwork worked after several attempts and liberal application of WD-40 from my supplies. The door swung open with a haunting creak, revealing an interior that smelled of dust, mildew, and decades of neglect. The main room contained a stone fireplace, a worn leather couch draped with faded quilts, and a rough-hewn dining table surrounded by 4 mismatched chairs. A thick layer of dust covered every surface, and mouse droppings littered the corners. The kitchen area consisted of an ancient wood-burning stove, a hand pump over a stone sink, and cupboards with peeling paint. "Home, sweet home," I muttered, setting down my supplies and surveying what I'd impulsively decided would be my accommodation for the next few weeks. After opening the shutters to admit what little winter daylight remained, I conducted a more thorough exploration. A narrow staircase led to a loft area with 2 twin beds covered in plastic sheeting. A back door opened to a covered porch overlooking the frozen lake, the view admittedly spectacular despite the cabin's shortcomings. A woodshed attached to the side of the building contained, thankfully, a substantial stack of seasoned firewood. As darkness fell rapidly, the temperature inside the cabin dropped to uncomfortable levels. I focused on making one area habitable for the night, clearing debris from the fireplace and carefully building a fire with newspaper kindling and smaller logs. The chimney drew well, much to my relief, and soon a warm glow illuminated the main room. Using melted snow heated on the now functioning wood stove, I cleaned enough dishes to prepare a simple meal of canned soup and crackers. As I ate in silence, illuminated only by firelight and a battery-powered lantern, the magnitude of my situation settled over me. Here I was, hundreds of miles from anyone who knew me, in a broken-down cabin that represented my parents' final estimation of my worth. Yet strangely, for the first time since Melissa's departure, I felt something like peace. The simplicity of immediate needs, warmth, food, shelter, provided a focus that had been lacking in my grief-stricken existence. The absolute silence, interrupted only by the crackling fire and occasional settling of the cabin's timbers, soothed my jangled nerves. The next morning I awoke stiff, but surprisingly refreshed after sleeping on the couch near the fire. Sunlight streamed through the windows, transforming the dusty interior into a tableau of dancing particles that almost appeared magical. Outside, the landscape sparkled under a fresh dusting of snow, the frozen lake stretching toward mountains that pierced a perfectly blue sky. With daylight on my side, I began the process of making the cabin more livable. I swept floors, scrubbed surfaces, repaired what I could with the limited tools I'd brought, and made an inventory of issues that would require professional attention if I decided to keep the property. To my surprise, the well pump in the kitchen produced clear, cold water after several minutes of persistent effort. While clearing cobwebs from a corner bookshelf, I discovered a collection of family photographs I hadn't noticed during my initial inspection. Most featured scenic landscapes without people, but several showed a much younger version of my father standing proudly outside the cabin or holding up fish beside the lake. One photo in particular caught my attention. My parents, looking to be in their 30s, arms around each other on the cabin's porch, wide smiles on their faces. The date stamp on the back read, June 1991, the summer before I was born. I had never seen this photo or any others of them at this cabin. According to family lore, they had purchased the property on a whim during their early marriage, but rarely visited due to its remote location. Yet here was evidence they had been here looking happy and relaxed around the time of my conception. Had this place held special meaning for them that they never shared? Was there some connection to me that explained why they had left it specifically to me and not Jackson? These questions occupied my mind as I continued cleaning. Behind a stack of ancient hunting magazines, I found a locked metal box containing fishing gear, additional photos, and several sealed envelopes addressed to Robert Jenkins at a post office box in Talkeetna. The return addresses were from various mining supply companies and the Alaska Department of Natural Resources dated throughout the 1990s. This discovery added another layer to the mystery. Had my father been involved in mining activities here, nothing in our family history had ever suggested this. My father had made his fortune in commercial real estate development in Seattle. Any Alaskan mining ventures had never been mentioned. On my third day at the cabin, while chopping additional firewood, I noticed movement at the tree line. Tensing initially, I relaxed when I realized it was a person approaching on snowshoes, not the bear I had momentarily feared. An older man with a silver beard and weathered face made his way toward me, raising a gloved hand in greeting. "Thought someone might be up here," he called as he drew closer. "Saw smoke from the chimney yesterday. Not many folks come out this way, especially in winter." "I inherited the place recently," I explained, setting down my axe. "Just checking it out, doing some basic repairs." "Jenkins' boy?" he asked, surprising me. "You look like him around the eyes." "You knew my father?" "Ethan Donnelly," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Your dad and I were neighbors out here for nearly 20 years. My cabin's about 2 miles that way." He gestured toward the northwest. "Sorry to hear about Robert and Diana. Bad business with that plane." I invited him inside, grateful for human contact and the possibility of learning more about my parents' connection to this place. Ethan accepted a cup of coffee, settling into one of the dining chairs, with the comfort of someone who had sat there many times before. "Your dad never mentioned me?" he asked, noting my confusion. "To be honest, he barely mentioned this cabin," I admitted. "I grew up thinking they never came here." Ethan's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise. "Never came here. They were up every summer for at least 2 weeks, sometimes longer. Your dad was here for nearly a month each fall during hunting season. Came in winter occasionally too, when he could get away from the city." This revelation stunned me. "Are you sure I never knew them to take vacations here? They went to Europe, the Caribbean, Hawaii, but never mentioned Alaska trips." "Son, I've got 20 years of memories fishing that lake with your father. Diana would make her famous sourdough pancakes and we'd sit right at this table playing cards when the weather turned. They were here, no question about it." He went on to share stories about my parents that painted them in a light I had never seen: relaxed, adventurous, freed from the corporate image they maintained in Seattle. According to Ethan, my father had been passionate about the Alaskan wilderness, often speaking of his desire to spend more time here after retirement. "What about mining?" I asked, mentioning the envelopes I'd found. Ethan's expression shifted subtly. "Robert did some prospecting over the years. Hobby more than anything, I thought. Though he got pretty serious about it maybe 15 years back. Brought in some equipment, was very hush-hush suddenly. Then just as quickly he seemed to lose interest. Never mentioned it again." As Ethan prepared to leave a few hours later, he pointed to a door in the back of the cabin I had assumed was a pantry. "You checked the back room yet?" That was Robert's private space. "Kept it locked most of the time." I admitted I hadn't opened it, having found it secured with a heavy padlock for which I had no key. "Might be worth looking into," Ethan suggested cryptically. "Robert spent a lot of time in there his last few visits. Said he was organizing something important." After Ethan's departure, I examined the padlocked door with renewed interest. Unlike the cabin's main entrance, this lock was newer, more substantial, and had no corresponding key in the paperwork I'd received. Whatever lay beyond was something my father had specifically secured against casual entry. For the next several days, between continued cleaning and repair work, I made various attempts to open the locked room. I tried every key I could find in the cabin, examined the hinges for potential removal, and even considered breaking the door itself before deciding against damaging my inheritance further. Each night as I sat by the fire contemplating the limited progress I'd made in both repairing the cabin and understanding why it had been left to me, my thoughts increasingly fixated on what might be hidden in that locked room. What had my father been organizing that was so important? Why had my parents kept their connection to this place secret from their children? And most puzzling of all, why leave a seemingly worthless property to me, while giving Jackson millions in prime real estate? The questions swirled in my mind, replacing the constant thoughts of Melissa and Jackson that had dominated my consciousness for weeks. For the first time since their betrayal, I found myself genuinely curious about something unrelated to my pain. The mystery of the cabin and its locked room provided a focus that felt like the first step toward healing. On my 7th day at the cabin, frustration with the locked door reached its peak. After examining the padlock for the 100th time, I decided more drastic measures were warranted. Using a combination of tools from my supplies, a crowbar hammer, and the blade of my hunting knife, I attacked the hasp securing the lock to the doorframe. The aged wood surrounding the screws finally splintered under sustained pressure, and the entire assembly clattered to the floor. The door swung open to reveal a space unlike anything I expected. Rather than a simple storage closet, I discovered a fully equipped office. A sturdy desk dominated the center, its surface covered with maps, notebooks, and geological survey documents. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall, while the other displayed topographical maps of the surrounding area marked with various notations in my father's distinctive handwriting. A gun safe stood in one corner, and shelves held collections of rock samples, each meticulously labeled. Most surprising was the modern equipment: a satellite phone charging station, a laptop computer now outdated, but clearly once high-end, and what appeared to be specialized testing equipment for mineral samples. This room had received attention and investment far beyond anything else in the cabin. I approached the desk, drawn to a leather-bound journal prominently positioned in the center. Opening it revealed my father's familiar handwriting, beginning with an entry dated nearly 20 years ago. Initial surveys confirm presence of gold deposits in Sector 4. Preliminary tests suggest concentrations far exceeding regional averages. Further investigation required before filing official claim. Must maintain absolute secrecy until full extent is determined. My hands trembled as I flipped through subsequent entries which documented years of careful exploration, sample collection, and analysis. According to my father's meticulous records, he had discovered a potentially massive gold deposit on land adjacent to the cabin property land that was unclaimed at the time of his discovery. The most recent entries, dated just months before my parents' death, detailed his final conclusions. All tests confirm initial findings. Conservative estimates place deposit value at $500 million minimum. Have secured mineral rights through Shell Corporation to maintain privacy. Documentation in safe. Will reveal to family after final verification process complete. My mind reeled with implications. My father had discovered a gold deposit worth $500 million and had been preparing to share this information with the family when the plane crash occurred. The cabin wasn't a worthless inheritance. It was the key to accessing an extraordinary fortune. The combination to the gun safe was written in code on the final page of the journal. Using my father's birthdate and anniversary as the key, I deciphered it and opened the heavy door. Inside, alongside 2 hunting rifles and a handgun, I found a waterproof document case containing official mineral rights claims, geological surveys verified by independent experts, and legal documents establishing ownership through a corporation named Jenkins Family Holdings, LLC, of which, according to the paperwork, I was the sole inheritor following my parents' death. Additional documents included detailed maps showing the exact location of the deposit extraction plans developed with mining engineers and environmental impact studies already completed in preparation for development. My father had been thorough, spending years quietly preparing everything needed to extract this wealth responsibly and legally. One final envelope contained a handwritten letter addressed to me specifically. Ian, if you're reading this, something has prevented me from sharing this discovery in person. Your mother and I always saw in you qualities that would make you the right steward for this legacy, patience, integrity, and perspective about what truly matters in life. The gold is valuable, but the land itself is priceless. Trust your judgment about how to proceed, but remember that wealth can destroy as easily as it can build. We love you, Dad. Tears streamed down my face as I absorbed his words. All those years I had felt less favored. My parents had been watching, evaluating, and ultimately entrusting me with something far more significant than Jackson's inheritance. They had seen qualities in me that I hadn't recognized in myself. The following morning, I hiked through snow-covered forest to Ethan's cabin, the journal and critical documents secured in my backpack. When I explained my discovery, his expression confirmed he knew more than he had initially revealed. "Your father swore me to secrecy," he admitted. "Made me promise I wouldn't tell anyone, not even you kids, until he was ready. After the accident, I wasn't sure what to do. Figured the lawyer would have instructions." "Did you know the extent of it?" I asked. "The value. Robert never gave me exact figures, but from the equipment he brought in and the experts he occasionally consulted, I knew it was significant. He was cautious, wanted everything verified multiple times, all the legal aspects covered before going public." Ethan hesitated. He mentioned once that he was being careful about how this would affect his family. Said money had already done enough damage to one of his children, and he wouldn't let it ruin the other. The implication was clear. Jackson had already been shaped by wealth and privilege, not always for the better. This discovery would have been entrusted to him. With Ethan's guidance, I ventured to the specific location indicated in my father's maps. Despite heavy snow cover, we found the markers he had placed inconspicuous to casual observers, but clear indicators to those who knew what to look for. A small, unmarked entrance led into what appeared to be an abandoned test mine, but extended beyond into areas where my father had taken samples, showing extraordinary gold concentrations. Standing at the entrance, looking at unassuming rock that potentially contained millions in precious metal, I felt overwhelming responsibility. This wasn't just a financial windfall. It was my father's legacy, his final message about what he truly valued, and who he trusted to carry that forward. Back at the cabin that evening, I began making calls using the satellite phone from my father's office. First to a geologist recommended in his notes, then to an environmental consultant he had previously worked with, and finally to a lawyer specializing in mining rights. Each conversation confirmed what the documents suggested. I was sitting on one of the largest gold discoveries in recent Alaskan history. As I laid out my father's maps and notes across the now clean dining table, I realized the cabin itself had been transformed in my perception. What had initially seemed like a worthless, broken-down structure was actually the centerpiece of a carefully constructed plan, a deliberate disguise for something extraordinarily valuable, much like the unassuming rocks that contained goldveins. It struck me that perhaps my father had seen the same in me, unremarkable on the surface to casual observers, but containing hidden value that would emerge under the right circumstances. The thought brought a smile to my face for the first time in months. That night, as snow fell gently outside and firelight flickered across walls that now held meaning beyond their weathered appearance, I began formulating plans for the future, not just for the gold, but for myself. The path forward would require patience, wisdom, and integrity, exactly the qualities my father had seen in me when no one else had, not even myself. Over the next 3 weeks, my father's discovery was methodically verified by experts who traveled to the remote site, braving winter conditions, to confirm what the documents had claimed. The lead geologist, Dr. Amanda Foster, stood in the main tunnel, shining her specialized light on a vein running through the rock wall. "Your father wasn't exaggerating," she said, her breath visible in the cold air. "Based on our core samples and preliminary assays, this deposit is exceptional both in quality and quantity. His estimate of $500 million might actually be conservative, depending on extraction methods and market prices." The environmental assessment team confirmed that with proper techniques, the mine could be developed with minimal impact on the surrounding ecosystem. The legal team verified that all mineral rights and claims were properly filed and transferred to me through my father's carefully established company structure. Word of the discovery inevitably began to spread through the small community of mining professionals in Alaska. Soon, representatives from major mining corporations were reaching out with acquisition offers, some approaching $1 billion for complete rights to the deposit. I established temporary headquarters in Talkeetna, converting a rented cabin into an office where I could meet with various experts and executives. The transformation in how I was treated was both amusing and disturbing. People who would have overlooked me entirely weeks earlier now hung on my every word. Business cards were pressed into my hands at the local diner. Invitations to exclusive industry events arrived daily. Through it all, I kept returning to my father's letter, particularly his warning that wealth can destroy as easily as it can build. I began to understand why he had been so careful about how this discovery would affect his family. The sudden attention and deference from strangers gave me a small taste of what Jackson had experienced his entire life. People responding, not to who you are, but what you possess. 6 weeks after my initial discovery, as news of the gold deposit began appearing in mining industry publications, I received the call I had been both expecting and dreading. Jackson's name flashed on my phone screen one evening as I sat reviewing development proposals in my Talkeetna office. Ian, little brother. His voice boomed with forced joviality. Why haven't you been returning my calls? I've been worried sick about you disappearing to Alaska all this time. I'm sure you've been beside yourself with concern, I replied, keeping my tone neutral despite the sarcasm in my words. Listen, I've been hearing some interesting rumors. Something about a gold discovery, the cabin property. You should have called me immediately if you found something valuable. As family, we should discuss this together. Like we discussed you and Melissa getting together behind my back. An uncomfortable pause followed. That was unfortunate timing, I admit. But Melissa and I truly connected. These things happen. Water under the bridge now, right? The important thing is that we're family, and family sticks together when it comes to business opportunities. Is that what we do? Funny, I don't recall that principle being applied when you received properties worth millions while I got a worthless cabin. About that, Jackson's tone shifted to one of practiced sincerity. I've been thinking that division wasn't entirely fair. I'd be happy to discuss a more equitable arrangement now that we know the cabin property has value. How generous of you, I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. And what does Melissa think about all this? Is she excited about potentially reconnecting with her former fiancé now that he might not be a pathetic loser after all? Jackson cleared his throat awkwardly. She feels terrible about how things ended. We both do. In fact, we've been talking about flying up there to see you clear the air properly. This gold situation could be a fresh start for all of us. The conversation continued in this vein, with Jackson alternating between expressions of familial loyalty and thinly veiled attempts to position himself for a share of the discovery. I ended the call non-committally, promising to think about his suggestion to visit. Less than a week later, they arrived unannounced at my Talkeetna office, Jackson in an expensive parka that looked fresh from the store, Melissa beside him, her familiar perfume filling the small space as they entered. The diamond engagement ring on her finger caught the light intentionally displayed. Surprised, Jackson announced, arms spread wide, as if expecting a joyful reunion. We thought it was time for a family meeting. Melissa stepped forward, her expression carefully composed into one of contrition. Ian, I know things ended badly between us. I said things I regret deeply. I was in a difficult place emotionally after your parents' passing, not thinking clearly. I studied her face, searching for the woman I had loved for 4 years. All I saw was calculation behind her practiced smile, her eyes occasionally darting to the development plans spread across my desk. It's quite a coincidence that your regret surfaces exactly when news of the gold deposit goes public, I observed. That's unfair, Jackson interjected. We've been trying to reach you for weeks long before any news broke. Phone records would suggest otherwise, I replied calmly. But it doesn't matter. I appreciate you making the trip, but there's nothing to discuss regarding the mine. The mineral rights are legally mine through Dad's company, and I've already made decisions about development. Jackson's friendly facade cracked slightly. Without consulting family, Dad would have wanted all of us involved. This discovery belongs to the Jenkins family legacy. I agree completely, I said, surprising them both. That's why I'm following the specific instructions Dad left regarding how the discovery should be handled. He was very clear about who he was entrusting with these decisions. The meeting deteriorated from there, with Jackson's offers of help becoming increasingly transparent attempts to claim a portion of the wealth. Melissa vacillated between appeals to our past relationship and subtle reminders of how beneficial it would be to have Jackson's business connections. I remained polite but firm, escorting them out after declining their suggestion to extend their stay. As their rental car pulled away, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. Seeing them through the lens of my new understanding both of myself and my parents' intentions had stripped away the last of my pain. They were simply people who valued certain things: status, wealth, appearances. Their choices had been consistent with those values, just as my parents' final decision had been consistent with recognizing different values in me. The same afternoon, I had a meeting scheduled with an environmental engineering consultant who had been recommended by several local mining operators for her innovative approaches to sustainable extraction. Sarah Winters arrived precisely on time, dressed, practically in work clothes, suitable for field visits, rather than the business attire I'd grown accustomed to seeing on visiting executives. "I reviewed your father's environmental impact studies," she said after introductions, diving straight into business. "They were ahead of their time when conducted, but there are newer techniques we should consider, particularly for water protection in this watershed." Her straightforward approach was refreshing after Jackson and Melissa's performance. Over the next several hours, Sarah walked me through various options for developing the mine with minimal environmental impact, never once mentioning the deposit's value or my personal windfall. Her focus remained entirely on doing the job right. "What's your connection to Alaska?" I asked as our meeting concluded. "Your expertise seems very specific to this region." "Born and raised in Fairbanks," she replied. "Left for college, got my engineering degrees, worked for some big firms in the lower 48. Came back 8 years ago when I realized I was helping corporations find loopholes, rather than actually protecting the places I cared about. Now I only consult on projects committed to genuine environmental responsibility." Something about her integrity resonated with me. "Would you be interested in continuing to consult as this project develops? I could use someone who knows what they're talking about and isn't just telling me what they think I want to hear." Sarah considered the offer, studying me with clear, intelligent eyes. I usually avoid long-term arrangements with new discoveries. Too often, initial good intentions get lost once the dollar signs start adding up. "Fair enough," I nodded. "How about this: work with me on the initial development plan? If at any point you feel the project is compromising your environmental standards, you can walk away, no questions asked, with full compensation for your time." A small smile formed on her lips. "You're not what I expected based on the rumors circulating about the lucky inheritor who stumbled on a fortune. I'm discovering I'm not who most people expected me to be," I replied honestly, including myself. Over the following months, the Jenkins Gold Project took shape under my direction, with Sarah becoming an integral part of the development team. I rejected outright acquisition offers in favor of maintaining controlling interest through my father's company, partnering with a mid-sized mining operation with a proven environmental record. I made 2 significant decisions that raised eyebrows throughout the industry. First, I allocated 20% of all proceeds to a trust dedicated to environmental conservation and sustainable economic development in rural Alaska communities. Second, I insisted on employment priority for local residents, including establishing training programs for positions throughout the operation. As spring arrived, transforming the landscape from white to vibrant green, I found myself spending more time at the cabin. No longer a symbol of rejection, it had become a place of connection to my parents, to the land, and to a version of myself I was just discovering. I invested in thoughtful renovations, preserving its rustic character while making it comfortable for extended stays. Sarah began visiting regularly. As the project progressed, our professional relationship gradually evolving into friendship. Unlike my relationship with Melissa, which had been built partly on her vision of who I might become, Sarah saw and accepted who I actually was. Our conversations ranged from technical mining details to philosophical discussions about responsibility and legacy, all without pretense or agenda. One evening, as we sat on the rebuilt porch watching the sunset reflect off the now thawed lake, Sarah asked the question few others had thought to pose: What will you do when the mine is fully operational? Most people in your position would be shopping for mansions and yachts by now. I considered her question seriously. I think I'll stay here at least part of the year. Monitor the operation, make sure it stays true to its commitments. Maybe use some of the proceeds to fund engineering scholarships for local students. I smiled. Decidedly boring plans for a newly minted millionaire, I know. Not boring, she corrected. Purposeful. There's a difference. As our eyes met, I recognized something I hadn't felt in a long time. Connection based on shared values, rather than convenience or appearance. Whether this connection would develop into something more remained to be seen, but for the first time since Melissa's betrayal, I was open to the possibility. The gold discovery had changed my life, but not in the ways most would assume. The true value hadn't been in the minerals themselves, but in discovering what my parents had seen in me all along, and what Melissa and Jackson had been too superficial to recognize. 1 year after discovering the gold deposit, I stood on the observation platform overlooking what was now the Jenkins responsible mining operation. Below me, carefully designed facilities extracted gold using methods that minimized environmental impact. The operation employed over 200 people, more than half from local communities, many trained through programs we had established. The cabin, once dilapidated and forgotten, had been thoughtfully restored. I maintained its rustic character while adding modern amenities that allowed comfortable year-round living. The original structure remained intact, including my father's office, which I preserved as a reminder of the journey that had brought me here. Sarah stood beside me on the platform, now the environmental director for the entire operation. Our professional relationship had indeed evolved into something deeper over the months of working closely together. Unlike my relationship with Melissa, built on superficial attraction and convenience, what Sarah and I shared was founded on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses. The revegetation project is exceeding expectations, she noted, consulting her tablet. Native species reestablishment is 20% ahead of projections in the initial extraction zones. The tribal council seemed pleased during yesterday's site visit, I added, especially with the training center results. Our conversation was interrupted by my phone vibrating with an incoming call. The screen displayed Jackson's name, a now familiar occurrence. Since news of the operational mine and its success had been featured in national business publications, his attempts to reconnect had grown increasingly persistent. "Excuse me," I said to Sarah. "I should take this. It won't take long." She nodded understandingly, moving toward the edge of the platform to give me privacy. "Jackson," I answered, "what can I do for you?" "Ian, we need to talk. In person." His voice carried an urgency I hadn't heard before. "Melissa and I are flying up tomorrow. There are important family matters to discuss." "We've been through this, Jackson. There's nothing to discuss regarding the mine. The corporate structure is established, operations are running smoothly, and the ownership is legally settled. It's not about that," he insisted, though his tone suggested otherwise. "It's about family, about making things right between us. Mom and Dad would have wanted us to reconcile." Despite my skepticism, I agreed to meet them at a restaurant in Talkeetna the following evening. Over the past year, I had reached a place of peace regarding their betrayal. The anger that once consumed me had faded, replaced by a calm understanding that their actions had reflected their own values and limitations, not my worth. Sarah raised an eyebrow when I mentioned the planned meeting as we drove back to the cabin. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "Probably not," I admitted, "but it feels like unfinished business. I'm curious what desperate angle they'll try next." The restaurant Jackson had selected was the most expensive in the small town recently opened to cater to the influx of business travelers attracted by the mine's success. They were already seated when I arrived, Jackson in a tailored suit that looked absurdly formal for the setting, Melissa beside him in a designer dress I recognized from her social media posts of their recent Caribbean vacation. Ian. Jackson rose, arms extended as if for an embrace I did not reciprocate. "You're looking well. Alaska clearly agrees with you." "Life agrees with me," I corrected, taking a seat across from them. "Let's not waste time. What was so urgent we needed to meet in person?" Melissa spoke first, her practiced expression of remorse immediately triggering my internal warning system. Ian, I know we hurt you deeply. Not a day goes by that I don't regret how things ended between us. Really, I replied calmly. Because your Instagram suggests you're having a wonderful time. The Bahamas looked lovely last month. She flushed slightly before continuing. What I mean is I regret how it happened. The timing was unfortunate, but sometimes life puts people on different paths for a reason. And sometimes people choose paths based on what they value most. I countered. No need to rewrite history, Melissa. You made your priorities clear when you called me a pathetic loser and left. Jackson intervened, his businessman persona taking over. What Melissa is trying to say is that we all made mistakes, but families should stick together through difficult times, which brings me to why we wanted to meet. He produced a folder containing legal documents and slid it across the table. We've been having some financial setbacks. The Miami property needs significant repairs after the last hurricane. The market in our sector is down. Temporary cash flow issues. I glanced at the documents without touching them. And this concerns me how. We're family, Ian, he emphasized, leaning forward. I'm proposing a loan against future dividends from the mine operation. Nothing substantial, just $5 million to tide us over. As 50% heir to our parents' estate, it's only fair I have some participation in this venture. They clearly intended for both their sons. The audacity was almost impressive. Let me make sure I understand, I said, keeping my voice level. You received properties worth over $3 million in the inheritance, which you've apparently mismanaged. You participated in the emotional betrayal of your brother, and now you're suggesting I owe you money because we share parents. Melissa jumped in. Ian, we know you're still hurt about what happened between us. If that's affecting your decision. It isn't, I interrupted. My personal feelings are irrelevant to this business decision. The mine is owned by Jenkins Family Holdings, established by our father with me as sole inheritor. He made that choice deliberately, just as he chose to leave you the properties, Jackson. Just as you both made your choices last year. Jackson's friendly facade cracked. This isn't right. That gold was on family property. I'm entitled to... You're entitled to exactly what the will specified, I stated firmly. Nothing more. Dad left detailed instructions about his discovery and who he wanted to manage it. He saw something in me that he didn't see in you, Jackson. Based on this conversation, his judgment seems sound. You've changed, Melissa said accusingly. Success has made you cold. I couldn't help but laugh. No, Melissa, I've simply gained clarity. A year ago, your rejection devastated me because I believed I needed your approval to have value. I've since learned otherwise. I stood, placing my napkin on the table. I wish you both well sincerely, but there will be no loans, no ownership shares, and no further discussions about the mine. I suggest you focus on managing what you have, rather than coveting what was never meant for you. Walking away from that table was the final step in a journey that had begun in heartbreak and confusion. I felt no anger toward them, no desire for revenge or validation, only a quiet certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Back at the cabin that evening, I shared the details of the meeting with Sarah. As we sat by the fire, the conversation, eventually turning to broader reflections. Do you ever wonder why your parents left things the way they did? She asked. They must have known how it would initially appear to you getting the cabin while your brother got valuable properties. I think they knew exactly what they were doing, I replied after consideration. Dad's letter said they saw qualities in me that would make me the right steward for this legacy, patience, integrity perspective. Maybe they knew those qualities would only fully emerge if I experienced what it felt like to seemingly get less than my share. A test of character, Sarah suggested. Or an opportunity for growth. Maybe both. I gazed into the fire. If they had simply told me about the gold or split everything equally, I might never have discovered what I'm capable of. I might still be defining my worth through others' opinions. The journey from betrayal to success had transformed me in ways no amount of inherited wealth could have. The initial pain of Melissa and Jackson's betrayal had broken open parts of myself. I had kept safely hidden my resilience, my capacity for independent decision-making, my ability to create something meaningful from apparent misfortune. The gold discovery, while financially significant, had been secondary to the real treasure, self-knowledge, and purpose. I had built something that honored my father's legacy while creating opportunities for others. I had found a partner who valued substance over appearance. And perhaps most importantly, I had discovered that my worth was never determined by others' assessments, but by the choices I made and the values I lived by. In the end, what had appeared to be my parents' final rejection had actually been their most profound gift. Not the gold itself, but the opportunity to discover the veins of strength and character running beneath the surface of my life, invisible until circumstances forced them into the light. The cabin, once a symbol of what I lacked compared to Jackson, now represented something far more valuable than any Miami mansion, a place of authenticity, purpose, and genuine connection. As I looked around at the restored walls that had witnessed my transformation, I felt a deep gratitude for what had initially seemed like the cruelest of inheritances. Life rarely gives us what we think we want. Sometimes, if we're fortunate, it gives us exactly what we need to become who we're meant to be. The broken cabin had never been broken at all. It was simply waiting for me to discover its true value, and in the process, my own. Have you ever received something that initially seemed worthless, only to discover its true value later? Share your story in the comments below. If this journey of betrayal to redemption resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more transformational stories. And remember, sometimes our greatest treasures are hidden in what appears to be our greatest disappointments. Thank you for joining me today, and may you find the gold in your own challenging situations.